Farmer was expecting his online bride, but when a dwarf woman stepped off the wagon, he froze. Daniel's hands trembled as he held the letter for the 10th time that morning. 3 months had passed since he placed the ad in the capital's newspaper, and finally someone had responded. The woman's name was Sarah Elizabeth, claiming to be 25 years old and a good homemaker. In the letters they exchanged, she spoke about her experience with gardening and raising chickens, exactly what he needed on his property in rural Virginia. The sound of wagon wheels grew louder along the dirt road. Daniel adjusted his hat and wiped his sweaty hands on his overalls. He had spent the whole morning nervous, tidying the house and rehearsing what he would say when he met her in person. After all, it wasn't every day that a 30-year-old man received a bride he had only known through letters. When the wagon finally stopped in front of his property's gate, Daniel hid behind the kitchen window. He wanted a few seconds to observe the woman who might become his wife before introducing himself officially. The driver got down first and went to the back of the vehicle. What happened next made Daniel's blood run cold. From the top of the wagon, a tiny woman extended her arms toward the driver. She couldn't have been more than 4 feet tall, wore a simple brown dress, and carried a small bundle of clothes. Her brown hair was tied in a simple bun, and even from a distance, the nervousness in her movements was visible. Daniel remained motionless behind the curtain, feeling his heart race. In the letters, Sarah Elizabeth had mentioned being of average height. How could she have omitted such an important detail? He had imagined a sturdy woman, capable of helping him with the heavy farm work. How could that small creature carry buckets of water or help with the harvest? The young woman paid the driver and stood by the wagon, looking at the house with an anxious expression. She carried a small cloth bag and a parasol that seemed disproportionate to her size. The afternoon wind made her dress flutter, and she had to hold her hat to keep it from flying away. Daniel knew he could no longer postpone the meeting. He took a deep breath, adjusted his hat again, and opened the front door. His footsteps sounded heavy on the wooden porch as he approached the gate. Sarah Elizabeth saw him, and her eyes lit up briefly before noticing the look of astonishment on his face. "Mr. Daniel?" she asked in a soft voice, but there was a note of apprehension in her tone. "Yes, that's me," he replied, still processing the situation. "And you must be Sarah Elizabeth." She nodded and gave a small curtsy. "Pleased to finally meet you in person." Silence stretched between them like an invisible barrier. Daniel couldn't hide his surprise, and she perfectly perceived his discomfort. Her cheeks flushed with shame, and she lowered her eyes to her own hands. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now, continuing. "May I come in?" Sarah Elizabeth asked timidly after a few seconds of awkward silence. Daniel realized he hadn't opened the gate yet. "Of course, I'm sorry." He opened the gate and gestured for her to pass, but maintained a respectful distance. As they walked toward the house, Sarah Elizabeth tried to make conversation. "The property is beautiful. The letters didn't do justice to the beauty of the place." "Thank you," murmured Daniel, still processing the situation. He had planned to show her the cornfields and the garden, talk about the plans to expand the cattle raising. Now she wondered if she would even be able to reach the apples in the orchard trees. Daniel's house was simple, but well kept. 2 bedrooms, a living room with a fireplace, a kitchen, and a small pantry. He had spent weeks tidying everything up, painting the walls and repairing the furniture that had belonged to his parents. He wanted to make a good impression on his future wife. "Would you like a glass of water?" he offered, still unsure how to handle the situation. "Please," replied Sarah Elizabeth, setting her bundle down on the living room floor. She looked around with genuine interest, noticing the details of the simple yet cozy decor. Daniel went to the kitchen and took a few minutes longer than necessary to prepare the water. He needed time to think. How could he tell her that there was a discrepancy between her expectations and reality? How could he explain that he needed a partner more physically capable for the demands of rural life? When he returned with the glass, he found Sarah Elizabeth examining the books on the small shelf in the living room. "Do you like to read?" she asked, turning with a shy smile. "A little." "They were my parents," he replied, handing her the water. "They always said reading was important, even for those who worked the land." Her eyes lit up. "I also enjoy reading very much. In my old home, I could borrow some books from the town's priest." It was the first time Daniel had seen a true expression of joy on her face since she stepped off the wagon. For a moment, he forgot his worries and focused on the person in front of him, not just her stature. "Where did you live before, miss?" he asked, sitting in the wooden armchair that had been his father's. Sarah Elizabeth hesitated before answering. "In a small town near Williamsburg. I lived with a family who raised me after my parents passed away." There was something in her voice that suggested the story was more complicated than she was telling, but Daniel didn't want to press. He himself had his own reasons for seeking a wife through advertisements instead of courting someone from the area. "And have you always lived here?" she asked, skillfully shifting the focus of the conversation. "I was born in this house. My parents worked this land for over 40 years. When they passed away last year, the property was left to me alone." He paused, realizing he was sharing personal information more easily than he had expected. "It's a lot of responsibility for one person." Sarah Elizabeth nodded understandingly. "I imagine it is. In your letters, you mentioned raising cattle and planting corn. It must be a lot of work." "It is. That's why I was looking—" He stopped himself, realizing he was about to mention his expectations for a more robust partner. "I was looking for someone to share this life with." An uncomfortable silence settled again. Sarah Elizabeth seemed to sense there was something he wasn't saying, and Daniel wrestled with his own honesty. He had been raised to be straightforward and honest, but how could he be frank without hurting her feelings? "Mr. Daniel," she said finally, placing the glass on the small table next to the armchair, "I can tell you're surprised by my appearance." The direct statement caught him off guard. He opened his mouth to deny it, but she raised a small hand to stop him. "I need to be honest with you. In the letters we exchanged, I wasn't completely truthful about my stature." Her cheeks flushed again, but she maintained eye contact with him. "I have a condition that makes me smaller than most people. I was born this way, and there's nothing that can be done to change it." Daniel was surprised by her courage in addressing the matter so directly. Most people he knew would avoid such an awkward conversation. "Why didn't you mention this in the letters?" he asked, trying to keep a neutral tone. "Because I was afraid," she replied simply. "Afraid that you wouldn't want to meet me. Afraid of spending more time alone." Her voice trembled slightly. "I know I'm not what you expected, and if you want me to leave on the next transport, I'll understand perfectly." Her raw honesty touched him in an unexpected way. Daniel had expected to find excuses or lies, but instead, he found courage and vulnerability. "You don't need to leave immediately," he said slowly, "but I need to be honest too. I was expecting someone who could help with the physical work on the farm, someone who could carry heavy loads, help with the harvest, handle the livestock." The words came out harsher than he intended, and he saw pain cross her eyes like a shadow. But she just nodded, as if she had already expected that answer. "I understand perfectly," she said, trying to maintain her composure. "You need a practical partner, not someone who would be more of a burden than a help." "I didn't say you would be a burden," protested Daniel, but the words sounded weak even to his own ears. "You don't need to say it. I know what I represent for a property like this." Sarah Elizabeth got up and went to her bundle. "Perhaps it's best if I leave in the morning. I can pay you for one night's accommodation." "You don't need to pay anything," Daniel said quickly. "You are my guest." They ate dinner in silence that night. Daniel had prepared a meat stew with vegetables from the garden, hoping to impress his potential future wife with his cooking skills. Now the meal seemed tasteless, and the tension in the small kitchen was almost palpable. Sarah Elizabeth ate little and politely thanked him for the food. She insisted on washing the dishes, even when Daniel protested that it wasn't necessary. He watched as she needed to stand on a chair to reach the sink properly and felt guilty for noticing that detail. "You can have the main bedroom," Sarah Elizabeth said when they finished cleaning the kitchen. "I can sleep in the living room." "Absolutely not," replied Daniel. "You are the guest. I'll sleep in the living room." After a brief, polite discussion, they agreed that she would stay in the guest room that had belonged to his younger sister, who had married and moved to the capital 5 years earlier. Daniel made the bed with clean sheets he had saved especially for the occasion. "Good night, Mr. Daniel," said Sarah Elizabeth at the bedroom door, "and thank you for your hospitality despite the circumstances." "Good night, Sarah Elizabeth," he replied, avoiding looking her in the eye. Daniel spent the night awake in the living room, staring at the ceiling and rethinking all his expectations. He had saved money for months to place the ad in the capital's newspaper, hoping to find a companion who would share his dreams of expanding the property. Now he felt lost, unsure how to proceed. The next morning, he woke to the sound of someone moving in the kitchen. When he got up from the makeshift sofa, he found Sarah Elizabeth already dressed and preparing coffee. "Good morning," she greeted without looking at him. "I hope you don't mind. I woke up early and thought I'd make breakfast." "You don't need to trouble yourself," said Daniel, rubbing his eyes. "You are the guest." "I like to keep busy," she replied, placing bread on the table. "It helps me not to think too much." They drank coffee in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. Sarah Elizabeth had made strong, flavorful coffee, and the bread was perfectly warmed. Daniel had to admit she knew her way around the kitchen. "When should I expect the next transport?" she asked as she collected the cups. "A wagon usually comes by on Tuesday," replied Daniel. "But with the rain threatening, it might take longer." As if her words were prophetic, the sky quickly darkened and the first raindrops began to fall. Within minutes, what had started as a drizzle turned into a torrential downpour. "Looks like I'll be staying another day," said Sarah Elizabeth, watching the rain from the kitchen window. Daniel nodded, unsure whether to feel relieved or more anxious about the forced extension of the visit. The rain made the roads impassable for wagons, especially those carrying passengers. "Can I help with anything around the house?" she offered. "I don't like sitting idle." "That's not necessary," Daniel began, but she was already looking around, assessing what could be done. "These cabinets could use reorganizing," she said, pointing to the pantry. "And I noticed some mending in the basket in the living room." Daniel hesitated. Allowing her to help with household chores might give the impression he was considering the possibility of her staying. On the other hand, she seemed genuinely interested in keeping busy. "If you insist, miss," he said finally, "but don't feel obligated." Sarah Elizabeth spent the morning reorganizing the pantry with impressive efficiency. She grouped items by category, made better use of the shelf space, and even found some supplies Daniel had forgotten he had. When he entered the pantry to get something for lunch, he was surprised by the transformation. "You have a talent for organization," he remarked, genuinely impressed. "I've had plenty of practice," she replied with a sad smile. "In the house where I lived before, I was responsible for keeping everything in order." Daniel once again sensed there was more to her story than she was telling, but he didn't want to press. Instead, he watched as she worked, noting the meticulousness and care she put into every task. During lunch, the rain continued heavily. Sarah Elizabeth had prepared a simple soup with the ingredients she found in the reorganized pantry, and it was delicious. Daniel found himself thinking it had been a long time since anyone had cooked for him. "Tell me about cattle raising," she said suddenly, breaking the silence. "In your letters you mentioned you plan to expand the herd." Daniel was surprised by her interest. "I have 12 head now. It's not much, but it's a start. The idea is to reach at least 20 in the next 2 years. "And do you have enough pasture for that?" "I do, but I'd need to fence an additional area. It's hard work setting posts and stretching wire." Sarah Elizabeth nodded thoughtfully. "What about raising chickens? I saw a small coop outside." "I only have 8 hens. I've been thinking of expanding that too, maybe setting up a better system for raising them." "I've always had a knack with chickens," she said, and for the first time since she arrived, her voice sounded animated. "In the house where I lived before, I took care of nearly 50. I know how to make better nests, how to keep them from escaping, how to treat them when they get sick." Daniel watched her as she talked about raising techniques he had never considered. There was real knowledge behind her words, not just theories she had read in books. "How did you learn so much about raising them?" he asked. "Necessity," she replied simply. "When you depend on what you produce to survive, you learn quickly." Again, Daniel felt there were layers to her story she wasn't telling, but he was beginning to realize that Sarah Elizabeth was more than she appeared at first glance. The afternoon passed more quickly than he expected. Sarah Elizabeth insisted on mending some of his shirts that had small tears, and her stitches were small and precise. She worked with her hands in a way that showed years of practice with delicate sewing. When the rain finally stopped in the late afternoon, Daniel decided to show her the property. Even though she would be leaving soon, he felt he owed it to her after all the work she had done during the day. "Would you like to see the animals?" he offered, picking up his hat. Her eyes lit up. "I'd like that very much." They walked across the still wet ground toward the chicken coop. The chickens were restless after the storm, and some had managed to get out of the small enclosure Daniel had put together. "I'll round them up," he said, but Sarah Elizabeth had already approached the birds with calm, confident movements. "Here, here," she called softly, making little noises with her mouth that Daniel had never heard before. To his surprise, the chickens responded immediately, coming toward her as if they'd known her for years. In just a few minutes, she had guided all the birds back into the enclosure without any rush or stress. Daniel was impressed with her natural way with animals. "How did you do that?" he asked. "Chickens respond to tone of voice and calm movements," she explained, carefully closing the small gate of the enclosure. "If you approach slowly and speak quietly, they trust you." They continued on to see the cattle. The cows were grazing peacefully in the field, but when they saw Daniel, some came up to the fence expecting extra feed. "They're beautiful," Sarah Elizabeth commented, watching the animals. "Well cared for." "They were my father's pride," said Daniel, feeling a twinge of longing. He knew every one of their names. "And do you know them too?" Daniel was a bit embarrassed to admit he didn't. "I never managed to develop the connection he had with them." "Sometimes it takes time," Sarah Elizabeth said kindly. "Each animal has its own personality. When you get to know them, it's easier to care for them." She approached the fence and reached out her hand to one of the nearest cows. The animal, initially cautious, eventually came closer to sniff her hand. "Hi, beautiful," she murmured to the cow. "How are you today?" Daniel watched fascinated as the cow responded positively to her attention. It was clear Sarah Elizabeth had a natural gift with animals, something he had always admired in his father, but never fully developed himself. When they returned to the house, the sun was setting, and the evening air was fresh and clean after the rain. Daniel found himself thinking it had been one of the most interesting days he'd had in months. "Thank you for showing me everything," Sarah Elizabeth said when they reached the porch. "You have a very beautiful property." "You're welcome," replied Daniel, and for the first time he was able to look directly at her without focusing on her height. "You have a special way with animals." They ate dinner in silence again, but this time it was a more comfortable silence. Sarah Elizabeth had prepared a stew with vegetables from the garden, and it was even better than the previous night's meal. "May I ask a question?" Daniel said as they finished eating. She nodded, waiting. "Why did you decide to answer my advertisement? Surely you had other options." Sarah Elizabeth hesitated, playing with the fork between her fingers. "Because in your letters you seemed kind, honest. Many of the advertisements I read were very direct about what they expected from a wife. Work, obedience, children. You wrote about partnership, about building something together." Daniel remembered the letters he had written, trying to be honest about his expectations without sounding overly practical. He had mentioned his dreams of expanding the property, but he had also talked about the importance of having someone to talk to at the end of the day. "And now?" he asked, "after meeting me in person." "Now I know your letters were honest," she said softly. "You really are kind, but I also know I'm not what you need." Her honesty hit him like a blow. Daniel spent the following night awake again, but this time his thoughts were different. Instead of focusing on what Sarah Elizabeth wasn't, he began thinking about what she truly was. She was intelligent, hard-working, and had practical knowledge that could be valuable on the farm. She had a natural gift with animals and a domestic efficiency that he admired. Moreover, she was honest in a refreshing way, something rare to find. The next morning he woke up determined to have a frank conversation with her before the next wagon arrived. He found her again in the kitchen preparing coffee, but this time she seemed different. Her clothes were arranged more carefully, as if she were preparing to travel. "Good morning," he greeted. "Good morning, Mr. Daniel. The coffee will be ready in a moment." "Sarah Elizabeth," he began, sitting at the kitchen table. I would like to speak with you before you leave. She turned to face him, and he could see the anxiety in her eyes. I've been thinking a lot these past few days, he continued, about what I'm really looking for in a partner, about what's important for the success of a property like this. Sarah Elizabeth said nothing, but Daniel noticed she was holding her breath. You were right when you said I'm looking for a partnership, someone to build something together, and I realized I was focusing on the wrong things. How so? She asked softly. I was thinking only about physical strength, the ability to carry heavy loads. But a farm needs much more than that. It needs knowledge, care, someone who truly understands animals and plants. Her eyes began to shine with an emotion Daniel couldn't identify. In the last 2 days, you've demonstrated knowledge I don't possess. You saw things in the organization of the house that I had never considered. You handled the animals in a way my father would approve of. He paused, carefully choosing his next words. If you're willing, I would like you to stay. Not because I need a wife, but because I believe we could build something good together. Sarah Elizabeth remained silent for a long moment, and Daniel began to worry that he had said too much or spoken inappropriately. Are you sure? She finally asked. I don't want you to feel obligated out of pity or guilt. It's not pity or guilt, Daniel replied firmly. It's recognition. You have real value to offer, and I would be foolish not to acknowledge that. A tear rolled down her face, but she smiled at the same time. Then yes, she said, I would very much like to stay. The relief Daniel felt surprised him. He hadn't realized how much he really wanted her to stay until he heard her positive response. There are a few things we need to talk about, he said, about how this would work, about expectations. I completely agree. They spent the morning talking about practical aspects. Sarah Elizabeth would be considered his fiancée officially, but they would take time to get to know each other better before any more serious commitment. She would have her own room and be treated with total respect. In return, she would help with the management of the house and with her knowledge of animal husbandry. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out, now continuing. During the conversation, Daniel learned more about Sarah Elizabeth's past. She had grown up as a sort of dependent in a family's home in Williamsburg, taking care of the children and animals in exchange for housing and food. She had never been treated as part of the family, always as a temporary servant. It was a difficult situation, she explained. They weren't cruel, but they made it clear I was different, that she would never be truly accepted. It will be different here, Daniel promised. Here, Miss will be a real partner. In the following weeks, they established a comfortable routine. Sarah Elizabeth took over the care of the chickens and was impressed by how quickly the small flock began producing more eggs under her care. She also reorganized the vegetable garden, planting medicinal herbs and vegetables that Daniel had never considered. Daniel, in turn, began including her in decisions about the property. When it came time to decide on expanding the pasture, he asked for her opinion on the best location. Sarah Elizabeth suggested an area he hadn't considered, and her logic was irrefutable. If we fence off this area here, she explained, pointing to a piece of land near the creek, the cattle will have direct access to water, and we won't need to carry buckets for them every day. It was a simple observation, but one that would save hours of daily work. Daniel wondered why he hadn't thought of it himself. As the days passed, they talked more during meals. Sarah Elizabeth was well-read and had interesting opinions about the books she found on Daniel's shelf. She also had a subtle sense of humor that he was beginning to appreciate. You know what I discovered about the yellow hen? She said one evening during dinner. No. What? She's the leader of the chicken coop. The others follow her everywhere. If I want to lead them somewhere, I just need to convince the yellow one first. Daniel laughed. Just like city politicians. Convince the leader, and the rest follow. Exactly. Chickens and people aren't so different after all. It was this kind of conversation that Daniel had hoped to have with a companion, and he was discovering that Sarah Elizabeth's intelligence more than made up for any physical limitations she might have. 1 month after she arrived, Daniel received an unexpected visit from his older brother, Robert. Robert lived in the city and came to the farm only a few times a year, usually when he needed to borrow money or wanted to check on what Daniel was doing with their parents' inheritance. Sarah Elizabeth was in the chicken coop when Robert arrived, so Daniel had a few minutes to explain the situation before formal introductions. "A mail-order bride?" Robert raised his eyebrows in disapproval. "Daniel, what a foolish idea. You don't even know her family, her background, nothing." "I know what matters," Daniel replied defensively. "She's a good person, hard-working and smart." "And where is she?" "I want to meet this mysterious woman who has convinced my younger brother." Daniel hesitated. He knew Robert had strong opinions about appearances and social conventions. "She's tending to the chickens. She'll be here soon." When Sarah Elizabeth appeared at the kitchen door, Robert's reaction was everything Daniel had feared. His eyes widened in surprise, and he couldn't hide his expression of shock. "This is Sarah Elizabeth," Daniel said quickly. "Sarah Elizabeth, my brother Robert." "Pleased to meet you," Sarah Elizabeth said politely, giving a small bow. Robert greeted her mechanically, but Daniel could see the thoughts running through his mind. After Sarah Elizabeth excused herself to wash her hands, Robert turned to Daniel with a look of disbelief. "Daniel, what are you thinking?" he whispered urgently. She's what?" Daniel crossed his arms, preparing for an argument. "Look at her. She can't help with anything heavy. She can't work in the fields. She probably can't even have normal children." Robert's words hit Daniel like slaps. "You know nothing about her." "I know what I see, and I see that you're being fooled by pity. That's no basis for a marriage, Daniel." "It's not pity," Daniel insisted, feeling his anger rise. "It's respect. Something you clearly don't understand." The argument was interrupted when Sarah Elizabeth returned. She had heard part of the conversation. It was impossible not to, given the raised voices they'd reached, but pretended not to have noticed anything. "Can I prepare something for lunch?" she offered. "I have a stew on the fire that should be ready soon." Robert agreed to stay for lunch, but Daniel could feel the tension throughout the meal. His brother asked direct questions about Sarah Elizabeth's background, about her family, about her plans for the future. She answered politely but with few words, clearly sensing the underlying hostility. "And your parents?" asked Robert. "Are they still alive?" "They passed when I was a child," Sarah Elizabeth replied simply. "I was raised by a family in Williamsburg." "What family? I know several people from there." "I don't think you'd know them," she said, skillfully avoiding the specific question. Daniel admired how she handled Robert's questioning without being disrespectful or revealing more than she wanted. There was an inner strength in her that many people wouldn't notice at first glance. After lunch, Robert asked to speak with Daniel privately. They went out to the porch while Sarah Elizabeth washed the dishes. "Daniel, I need to speak seriously with you. This situation can't continue." "Why not? She's not harming anyone." "She's harming you. She's wasting your chance to build a real family, to have heirs for the property." Robert lowered his voice. "And imagine what people in the area will say when they find out." "I don't care what people will say. You should care. Your reputation affects business. Who's going to want to buy cattle from someone who... He gestured vaguely toward the house. "Who what?" "Finish the sentence, Robert." "Who makes such questionable choices?" Daniel felt his blood boil. "The only questionable thing here is your prejudice." "It's not prejudice, it's realism. This woman can't be a suitable wife for you. It's impossible." "Based on what? You've known her for 2 hours." "Based on reality, Daniel. Look around. This is a rural property. You need a strong woman, capable of working side by side with you. Someone who can carry the burdens, help with the harvest, have healthy children." "She has other qualities." "What qualities? What can she offer that a normal woman can't offer better?" Daniel struggled to find the right words. How could he explain to Robert about Sarah Elizabeth's kindness with animals, about her practical intelligence, about the interesting conversations they had? His brother would only see these things as inadequate to justify marriage. "She understands me," he said finally, "and I understand her. That's rare." Robert sighed exasperatedly. "Daniel, you're 29. This might be your last real chance to find a suitable wife and start a family. Don't waste it on an emotional whim. It's not a whim. Then what is it? Love at first sight?" Robert laughed sarcastically. You don't even know her properly. I know enough to know she's a good person, and that she makes me happy. Happy? Robert seemed genuinely confused. Daniel, marriage isn't about happiness. It's about building a functional life, having children, keeping the property in the family. You're confusing sentimentality with real love. The conversation was interrupted when Sarah Elizabeth appeared at the porch door. Sorry to interrupt, but I came to ask if you'd like coffee. Thank you, but I need to leave, said Robert, standing abruptly. I have commitments in town. Daniel walked his brother to the wagon, knowing the conversation wasn't over. Think about what I said, murmured Robert before leaving, and if you change your mind, I can introduce you to some suitable young ladies in town. Daughters of respectable merchants, women who would be suitable partners. After Robert left, Daniel stayed on the porch watching the dust raised by the wagon. His brother's words echoed in his mind, planting seeds of doubt he didn't want to admit. Sarah Elizabeth joined him on the porch after a few minutes, bringing 2 cups of coffee. Your brother doesn't approve of our situation, she said bluntly. Robert has strong opinions about many things, replied Daniel, accepting the coffee. He's not wrong about some things. Sarah Elizabeth sat in the wooden chair beside him. I truly can't help with heavy physical work, and I don't know if we'll be able to have normal children. Daniel turned to look at her, surprised by her frankness. Have you thought about this before? Of course I have. It's a legitimate concern for any man considering marrying me. She paused, choosing her words carefully. I can't guarantee everything will be as you imagined when you placed that advertisement in the newspaper. And you? Daniel turned completely to face her. What did you imagine when you responded to the advertisement? I imagined someone who would accept me as I am, someone who would see value in me despite my limitations. She smiled sadly. Perhaps that was naive of me. It wasn't naive, and I accept you as you are. Accept, or are learning to accept. There's a difference. The question was so direct that Daniel was left speechless for a moment. It was true he was still adjusting his expectations, but that didn't mean he didn't value Sarah Elizabeth for who she was. I'm learning, he admitted honestly, but that's not bad. I'm learning things about you, about myself, about what really matters in a partnership. She nodded slowly. And if you decide you've learned enough to know this won't work? What if I decide I've learned enough to know it will work? They sat in silence, drinking coffee and watching the afternoon sun. Daniel wondered if other people faced such complex questions when forming relationships, or if their situation was unique. May I ask a question? Said Sarah Elizabeth after a while. Of course. Why did you never marry before? A man like you with a good property should have had many opportunities. Daniel hesitated. It was a question he sometimes asked himself. I never found the right person, I suppose, and after my parents passed I became very focused on keeping the property running alone. But you must have met women from the area. A few. But I always felt they were interested in the property, not in me. He paused, realizing the irony of his words. Or else I was interested in the convenience, not in them as people. And now, what changed? Daniel thought about the question. What had changed was that, for the first time, he felt he was getting to know someone truly. Not an idealized version based on expectations, but a real person with genuine qualities and flaws. Now I feel I'm having real conversations with someone, he said. Not pretending to be something I'm not, or expecting the other person to be something they're not. Sarah Elizabeth smiled, and it was the first genuinely happy smile he had seen on her face since she arrived. That evening, they dined with a greater closeness than before. The conversation flowed more easily, and Daniel found himself laughing at witty remarks she made about the chicken's behavior. The white chicken thinks she's superior to the others, she said, always eats first and chooses the best spot to sleep. But when there's danger, she's the first to run away. Just like the town mayor, laughed Daniel, first to serve himself, first to disappear when there's trouble. Do you know the mayor well? Unfortunately, yes. My father always said that politics and a chicken coop have a lot in common. Lots of noise, lots of mess. And in the end, the one in charge is the one who pecks the hardest. Sarah Elizabeth laughed loudly, a sound that filled the small kitchen in a pleasant way. Daniel realized it had been a long time since he had truly laughed with someone. After dinner, she insisted on showing him some sewing techniques she had learned over the years. They sat in the living room and she taught him how to make small repairs on clothes that he usually threw away because he didn't know how to fix them. "See, if you make the stitch like this," she explained, guiding his hands, "the seam becomes stronger and almost invisible." The closeness while she taught him made Daniel notice small details he hadn't seen before: the gentle scent of lavender in her hair, the concentration in her eyes when she worked, the competence of her small but agile hands. "Where did you learn to sew so well?" he asked. "The lady of the house where I lived was very particular about the appearance of clothes. She made me practice until every stitch was perfect." There was a note of sadness in her voice. "Actually, I learned to do many things out of necessity, not by choice." "Like what?" "Cooking, managing a household, caring for children, treating sick animals." She paused in her work to look at him. "I never had the option not to learn. If I didn't know how to do it, I had nowhere to stay." Daniel began to understand her past better. Sarah Elizabeth hadn't been raised as a daughter by the family in Williamsburg, but as a permanent servant. This realization explained her excessive gratitude for small kindnesses and her constant anxiety about being useful. "Here you don't have to earn your place every day," he said softly. "You can relax a little." "It's hard to stop doing something you've done your whole life," she admitted. "I still wake up every morning thinking about how I can justify my presence here." "Your presence is justified by itself. You don't need to constantly prove your worth." Sarah Elizabeth looked at him with an expression of gratitude mixed with disbelief, as if the idea of being valued simply for existing was completely new to her. That night, Daniel once again spent a long time awake, thinking. But his reflections were different now. Instead of focusing on Sarah Elizabeth's limitations, he was beginning to see the inner strength she had developed to survive and thrive in difficult circumstances. The next morning, he was awakened by a strange noise coming from the chicken coop. When he went out to investigate, he found Sarah Elizabeth handling a situation that deeply impressed him. One of the chickens had been attacked during the night, probably by a fox. The animal was injured but alive, and Sarah Elizabeth was carefully cleaning the wound while speaking softly to the bird to keep it calm. "How is she?" asked Daniel, approaching. "She'll be fine. The wound looks worse than it is." Sarah Elizabeth continued her work without looking up, but we'll need to keep her separate from the others for a few days while she heals. "How do you know how to do this?" "I've taken care of many injured animals over the years. You learn that patience and kindness heal more than any medicine." Daniel watched as she finished treating the chicken, then carefully placed it in a box with clean straw she had prepared. Her movements were confident and competent, showing real experience. "Thank you," he said when she finished. "I wouldn't know how to take care of her. Now you do. Next time, you can do it yourself." They spent the rest of the morning reinforcing the chicken coop to prevent future attacks. Sarah Elizabeth had several practical suggestions about how to make the enclosure safer without spending much money. "If we put some rocks here under the fence," she explained, "we can keep predators from digging their way in. And some thorny branches around it discourage climbing attempts." They were simple but effective solutions that showed a practical understanding of rural problems that Daniel admired. During lunch, a wagon arrived bringing supplies that Daniel had ordered from town. The merchant making the deliveries, Mr. Howard, was known for his excessive curiosity about his customers' lives. "And who is the young lady?" Howard asked immediately upon seeing Sarah Elizabeth. "Sarah Elizabeth, my fiancée," Daniel replied, noting it was the first time he had used that word publicly. Howard examined her from head to toe with curious eyes. "Fiancée, is she? Where is the young lady from?" "From Williamsburg," Sarah Elizabeth replied politely. "A well-known family from there?" "I don't believe you would know them." Daniel could see that Howard was making the same kind of assessment that Robert had made, but with less subtlety. The merchant was clearly surprised by Sarah Elizabeth's appearance and trying to decide whether to comment on it. "Well," Howard said finally, "I hope you'll be very happy together." His tone suggested exactly the opposite, and Daniel felt irritation growing inside him. After the merchant left, he apologized to Sarah Elizabeth. "You don't need to apologize for him," she said. "Curious people exist everywhere. But they didn't need to be so obvious in their disapproval. Honestly, I was surprised he was so polite. I've faced worse things." The naturalness with which she handled subtle hostility impressed him, but it also saddened him. No one should have to get used to that kind of treatment. That afternoon, Daniel made an important decision. When he went to town to take care of some banking business, he stopped by the local newspaper's office. "I'd like to place an announcement," he told the editor. "What kind of announcement?" "An engagement. Daniel Mitchell and Sarah Elizabeth Mitchell announced their upcoming marriage." The editor looked at him curiously. "Wedding date?" Daniel hesitated, realizing they hadn't formally discussed this yet. "Next month," he decided impulsively. When he returned home and told Sarah Elizabeth about the announcement, she was surprised. "Are you sure you want to make this public?" she asked. "This will make it harder to change your mind later." "I won't change my mind, and I want everyone to know that I'm proud to marry you." Her eyes filled with tears, but this time they were tears of joy. "Then yes," she said, "let's get married next month." They spent the following weeks planning a simple wedding at the farm. Sarah Elizabeth insisted on making her own dress, and Daniel was impressed by her sewing skills. The dress was simple but elegant, made from white fabric she had bought with her own savings. The town priest came to perform the ceremony, along with a few close neighbors, and to Daniel's surprise, Robert showed up at the last minute. "I can't say I approve," his brother murmured, "but you're my family. I won't miss your wedding." The ceremony was brief, but moving. When the priest asked if Daniel accepted Sarah Elizabeth as his wife, his answer was clear and firm. "I do with all my heart." When it was her turn, Sarah Elizabeth looked directly into his eyes as she replied, "I do, and I promise to be the best partner I can be." After the ceremony, the guests stayed for a simple dinner that Sarah Elizabeth had prepared with the help of some neighbor women. The food was delicious, and even Robert admitted that she was a good cook. "Maybe things will work out better than I imagined," he murmured to Daniel during the celebration. "Just maybe?" Daniel laughed. "I still have my doubts. But I can see she makes you happy, and that counts for something." As the months passed, Daniel and Sarah Elizabeth settled into a married routine that worked surprisingly well. She took full charge of the chickens and the vegetable garden, while he focused on the cattle and larger fields. But they always made important decisions together. The first major decision they faced as a couple was about expanding the chicken operation. Sarah Elizabeth suggested they could double the flock and start selling eggs in town, in addition to using them for their own consumption. "I have contacts from when I lived in Williamsburg," she explained, "people who would pay well for fresh, quality eggs." Daniel was intrigued. "What kind of contacts?" "The family I worked for had several merchant friends. Some of them always complained about the quality of eggs they bought at the local market." It was the first time Sarah Elizabeth mentioned something positive about her time in Williamsburg, and Daniel realized there were aspects of her past she hadn't fully shared yet. They invested in expanding the chicken coop, and Sarah Elizabeth was right about the demand. Within 2 months, they had a list of regular customers in town who paid premium prices for their eggs. The success of the egg business led to other experiments. Sarah Elizabeth suggested they plant aromatic and medicinal herbs for sale, something she had learned to do in Williamsburg. "Many people in town don't know how to grow these plants, but need them for home remedies," she explained. Again, her idea proved profitable. The extra income allowed Daniel to make improvements to the property he had dreamed of for years. One day, an unexpected letter arrived, addressed to Sarah Elizabeth. She read it silently, and Daniel could see tension growing in her expression. "Bad news?" he asked gently. "Complex," she replied, folding the letter carefully. "The lady of the family who raised me in Williamsburg has passed away. They want me to come back to handle the final arrangements." Daniel felt a pang of anxiety. "Do you need to go?" "I think so. She was the closest thing to a mother I had, even if the relationship was complicated." "Then we'll go together." "It's not necessary. I know you have a lot of work here. We're partners, remember? We'll go together." The trip to Williamsburg was the first time Daniel had left the region in years. They took a wagon to the nearest town, then a train to the capital, and finally another transport to Williamsburg. During the journey, Sarah Elizabeth told him more about her previous life. The Mitchell family, no relation to him, just a coincidence of surname, had taken her in as a ward when she was 8 years old, after her parents succumbed to a yellow fever epidemic. "They weren't cruel," she explained, as the train rattled along the tracks. "But they never let me forget that I was dependent on their kindness, that my condition made me a burden they carried out of charity." "Your condition isn't a burden," Daniel said firmly. "I know that now, but when you hear something repeatedly for years, you start to believe it." In Williamsburg, Daniel had the opportunity to see Sarah Elizabeth in her previous environment. The Mitchell family home was large and well decorated, showing they had considerable means. But Daniel immediately noticed how people treated his wife. "Sarah Elizabeth," exclaimed one of the family's daughters, "you're back, and you brought your husband." The tone was friendly on the surface, but Daniel detected a note of condescension, as if they were speaking to a child who had done something surprisingly adult. During the 2 days they spent there organizing the affairs of the late Mrs. Mitchell, Daniel observed how people assumed Sarah Elizabeth was available to serve, even now that she was a married woman with her own life. "Sarah Elizabeth, can you tidy up Mother's papers?" "Sarah Elizabeth, would you mind organizing the kitchen?" "Sarah Elizabeth, you always knew where Mother kept important things." She responded to every request politely, but Daniel could see the tension building in her shoulders. It was as if she automatically reverted to the subservient role she had played for so long. On the second night, Daniel gently confronted her about it. "You don't have to do everything they ask," he said, as they prepared for bed in the small room offered to them. "It's hard to say no, it was like that for so many years, but not anymore. You have your own family now, your own responsibilities." Sarah Elizabeth looked at him with an expression of gratitude and something else he was beginning to recognize as love. "Thank you for reminding me who I am now," she said softly. The next day, when more requests started coming, Daniel saw his wife straighten her shoulders and politely decline some tasks. "I'm sorry, but Daniel and I have to return to our property tomorrow," she said, when asked to stay longer to organize the house. "We have our own business to attend to." It was the first time Daniel heard her assert her independence with these people, and he felt pride swelling in his chest. During the journey back, Sarah Elizabeth was quieter than usual. When Daniel asked if she was okay, she sighed deeply. "I'm thinking about how life changes," she said. "A year ago, I would have stayed in Williamsburg as long as they wanted, doing anything they asked. Now I can't wait to get back home." "Our home," Daniel corrected. "Our home," she repeated, smiling. When they arrived back at the farm, everything seemed brighter and more welcoming than before. The chickens rushed to greet Sarah Elizabeth, and Daniel realized that this place had truly become a home in the fullest sense of the word. That evening, sitting on the porch, watching the sunset, Sarah Elizabeth took Daniel's hand. "Thank you," she said simply. "For what?" "For giving me the chance to discover who I really am, for seeing potential in me when I couldn't see it myself." "You always had that potential. You just needed someone to recognize it." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars appear in the sky. Daniel thought about how his life had changed since he placed that advertisement in the newspaper. He had expected to find a practical partner to help with the farm. Instead, he found someone who had taught him about courage, determination, and the true nature of love. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out, now continuing. In the following months, Daniel and Sarah Elizabeth's life settled into a comfortable and productive rhythm. The egg business continued to grow, and they had added the sale of herbs and some special vegetables that Sarah Elizabeth cultivated with particular success. One day, a young man arrived at the farm introducing himself as a representative of a local small producers cooperative. He had heard about their success with organic products and wanted to know if they would be interested in participating in a regional fair. "It would be an opportunity to expand significantly," explained the young man, whose name was Ryan. The fair takes place once a month in the capital and attracts buyers from all over the region. Daniel and Sarah Elizabeth exchanged glances. It was exactly the kind of opportunity they had discussed, but one that seemed too distant to consider seriously. "What kind of commitment would be required?" asked Sarah Elizabeth. "Mainly consistency in quality and quantity. The buyers need to know they can count on you every month." They asked for a few days to think it over and spent several nights discussing the pros and cons. The opportunity was tempting, but it would mean expanding production considerably. "We'd have to build a bigger chicken coop," said Daniel, "and expand the planting area." "And hire help," added Sarah Elizabeth. "We couldn't handle everything ourselves." The idea of hiring employees was new to both of them. Daniel had always worked alone or with occasional help from neighbors, but the business was growing beyond the capacity of 2 people. After much reflection, they decided to accept the challenge. They started small, committing to only part of the market's demand, with plans to grow gradually. The first employee they hired was a young man from town named Tyler, the son of a family that had lost their small property to debt. Tyler was hard-working and eager to learn, and Sarah Elizabeth took on the responsibility of teaching him about chicken care and herb cultivation. "The yellow hen is the leader," she explained to Tyler on the first day. "If you gain her trust, the others follow naturally." Daniel watched as his wife taught Tyler with the same patience and methodical approach she showed in everything she did. It was obvious she had a natural talent for teaching. The first market was a modest success. They sold all the products they brought, but Daniel realized there was much more to learn about marketing and presentation. "We need a visual identity," suggested Sarah Elizabeth after they returned from the market. "Something that makes our products stand out from the others." She had noticed that the most successful producers had distinctive packaging and professional presentation. She decided to create special labels for their products, using her sewing skills to make small cloth bags for the herbs. The attention to detail made a difference. At the second market, their products not only sold faster, but also attracted better prices. "Presentation matters more than I imagined," admitted Daniel. "Details count," agreed Sarah Elizabeth. "People judge quality by appearance, especially when they can't test the product beforehand." As the business grew, they faced new challenges. A prolonged summer drought threatened vegetable production, forcing them to invest in an irrigation system that consumed most of that year's profits. "Sometimes I wonder if we're growing too fast," Daniel said one evening after a particularly difficult day dealing with supply issues. "Growth always comes with challenges," replied Sarah Elizabeth. "The question is whether we're learning and adapting fast enough." She was right. With every obstacle they overcame, they became more confident and competent. What had started as a small side business was turning into a truly prosperous operation. By the end of the first year of participating in the market, they had tripled their income compared to the previous year. More importantly, they had developed a solid reputation for quality and reliability. "You're becoming legendary around here," joked Ryan, the cooperative representative, during one of his visits. "Other producers are trying to copy your methods." "Imitation is the sincerest form of flattery," laughed Sarah Elizabeth. Success also brought unwanted attention. A merchant from the capital offered to buy all their production at a fixed price, eliminating the need to participate in the markets. "It would be much easier," argued Daniel, "a steady customer, guaranteed income, without the difficulties of transportation and direct sales." But Sarah Elizabeth was hesitant. "What if he decides to change the terms? We would become completely dependent on a single person." They decided to decline the offer, preferring to maintain the customer diversification they had built. It was a wise decision, as they discovered months later that the same merchant had made similar offers to other producers, then tried to drastically lower prices once they became dependent on him. "Your prudence saved our business," Daniel said to Sarah Elizabeth when they learned of the fate they had escaped. "That wasn't prudence, it was distrust," she laughed. "When you grow up depending on the kindness of others, you learn to recognize when someone is offering too much." In their second year of marriage, they faced their first major conflict as a couple. Daniel wanted to expand into pig farming, capitalizing on their success with chickens. Sarah Elizabeth was reluctant, arguing that pigs would require a different kind of care and investment. "We know nothing about pigs," she argued. "With chickens, we had experience. This would be starting from scratch." "But the profit potential is much greater," insisted Daniel, "and we can learn." The discussion stretched on for weeks, with each holding their ground. It was the first time they had disagreed about something fundamental, related to the business, and Daniel didn't know how to resolve the impasse. The solution came from an unexpected source. Tyler, who had become a valuable and reliable employee, suggested they visit some farms that raised pigs before making a decision. "That way you both can see firsthand what it's like," he said, "and decide based on real knowledge, not assumptions." They spent a weekend visiting 3 different farms that raised pigs. What they saw confirmed both Daniel's hopes and Sarah Elizabeth's concerns. The profit potential was indeed high, but the work was much more intense and dirtier than raising chickens. Additionally, pigs required substantial initial investments in proper facilities. "What do you think now?" Daniel asked Sarah Elizabeth on the way back from the last visit. "I think you were right about the potential," she admitted, "but I also think we're not ready yet. Maybe next year when we have more capital and experience." It was a compromise that worked for both. Daniel agreed to wait another year, and Sarah Elizabeth agreed to start preparing by studying pig farming. "This is what I like about our relationship," Daniel said that night. "We can disagree without fighting and find solutions together." "It's because neither of us needs to be right all the time," replied Sarah Elizabeth. "We want what's best for our family and our business, not to prove who's smarter." The 3rd year brought significant expansion. They built a second chicken coop, hired 2 more employees, and began supplying restaurants in the capital, in addition to the monthly market. Sarah Elizabeth developed a particular reputation for her medicinal herb blends. Local doctors began recommending some of her products to patients interested in complementary natural remedies. "I never imagined I'd be considered an expert in anything," she said one evening, after receiving a special order from a doctor in the capital. "I always knew you had special knowledge," replied Daniel. "I was just waiting for the world to discover it too." Professional success was accompanied by personal growth for both. Daniel developed negotiation and planning skills he never imagined he possessed. Sarah Elizabeth gained confidence in her own opinions and leadership abilities. They also faced losses. The patriarch of a neighboring family, Mr. Edward, who had been a mentor and friend to Daniel's father, passed away from old age. Daniel served as one of the pallbearers and spoke words at the funeral. "Mr. Edward taught me that the land rewards honest work," said Daniel during the eulogy. "But more importantly, he taught me that neighbors look out for each other. That lesson will continue to live through all of us," he touched. Sarah Elizabeth held Daniel's hand during the funeral, offering silent support during a difficult moment. It was the kind of solid partnership that had developed between them over the years. After the funeral, Mr. Edward's widow, Mrs. Margaret, asked to speak with them. "Edward always said you two were an example of what marriage should be," she said with tears in her eyes. "True partners, building something together." "He was a great example to us," replied Sarah Elizabeth. "He always treated us with respect and gave us wise advice." "And now I want to give you some advice," said Mrs. Margaret. "Don't wait too long to have children. Life passes quickly, and children bring joy that no business can replace." It was a topic that Daniel and Sarah Elizabeth had discussed occasionally, but always vaguely and without firm decisions. Mrs. Margaret's words made them address the issue more directly. "What do you think about having children?" Daniel asked Sarah Elizabeth that evening. "I think about it often," she admitted, "but I also worry about the complications my condition might bring." "What kind of complications?" "Problems during pregnancy, difficulties in childbirth, the possibility of passing my condition to a child." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "It wouldn't be fair to bring a child into the world to face the same challenges I faced." Daniel had never considered these concerns and felt foolish for his lack of sensitivity. "Have you spoken to a doctor about this?" he asked. "No. Actually, I've avoided the topic because I was afraid of the answers. How about we talk to Dr. Williams in town? He's always been honest and kind to us." Sarah Elizabeth hesitated, but finally agreed. They scheduled an appointment for the following week. Dr. Williams examined Sarah Elizabeth carefully and asked several questions about her general health and family history. His answers were more encouraging than she had expected. "I see no medical reason why you can't have a normal pregnancy," he said. "Your condition is mainly a matter of stature, not overall health, and while there's a chance of passing the trait to a child, it's not a certainty." "And if we do pass it on?" asked Sarah Elizabeth. "Would it be fair?" Dr. Williams looked at her gently. "Miss Sarah Elizabeth, I've had the privilege of knowing you for a few years. I've seen how you've built a happy and successful life. If you had a daughter exactly like you, and she became as capable and resilient a woman as you are, that would be a blessing, not a curse." The doctor's words touched Sarah Elizabeth deeply. For the first time, she began to consider the possibility that her condition wasn't necessarily something negative to be avoided, but simply a characteristic that could be managed and overcome. "Thank you, Doctor," she said. "Your words mean a lot to me." On the way back home, Daniel and Sarah Elizabeth talked more openly about children than ever before. "If you want to try," said Daniel, "I'm completely supportive. And if you decide you don't want to, I support that completely too." "I do want to," said Sarah Elizabeth with a determination that surprised them both. "I want to give a child the kind of love and support I never had when I was little." 6 months later, Sarah Elizabeth discovered she was pregnant. The news filled them with joy, mixed with the natural anxiety of first-time parents-to-be. "We'll have to rearrange everything," said Daniel, looking around the house that would soon be home to 3 people. "Not everything," laughed Sarah Elizabeth. "Babies are small. They don't take up as much space as you imagine." The pregnancy progressed without serious complications. Sarah Elizabeth continued working, but Daniel insisted on taking over the heavier tasks. They hired additional help to ensure she could rest when needed. The neighbors were surprisingly supportive. Mrs. Margaret came several times to offer advice and practical help. Other women from the area shared experiences and tips about baby care. "I never expected our community to be so welcoming," said Sarah Elizabeth one afternoon, after receiving visits from several neighbors bringing baby clothes and groceries. "People tend to come together when there's a new life arriving," replied Daniel. "Babies bring hope." When it was time for the birth, Dr. Williams was present, along with an experienced midwife from the region. The birth was easier than Sarah Elizabeth had feared, and when they finally held their daughter, all anxiety disappeared. The girl was perfect and healthy, with a size that seemed normal for a baby. They named her Emma, in honor of Sarah Elizabeth's mother. "She's beautiful," whispered Daniel, holding his daughter for the first time. "And strong," added Sarah Elizabeth. "Look how she grabs your finger." The first months with Emma transformed their lives in ways they hadn't anticipated. The business continued to run well with the help of the employees, allowing both to dedicate significant time to their new daughter. Daniel discovered he had a natural talent for baby care. He was patient during sleepless nights and creative in finding ways to calm Emma when she was fussy. Sarah Elizabeth, in turn, proved to be an intuitive and dedicated mother. She established a routine that allowed her to care for Emma while still overseeing important aspects of the business. "She'll grow up knowing that women can be mothers and business owners at the same time," said Sarah Elizabeth one morning, while Emma slept in a crib near the kitchen table where they worked on the business accounts. When Emma turned 1, it became evident that she had inherited her mother's smaller stature. But far from being a source of worry, this only strengthened Daniel and Sarah Elizabeth's determination to raise her with all possible confidence and love. "She'll know from a young age that she's valued exactly as she is," said Sarah Elizabeth, watching Emma play on the living room floor. "She'll never have to doubt her own worth." The business continued to grow. By their 5th year of marriage, they had become one of the most respected suppliers in the region, with products being sold in several cities. Tyler, their first employee, had become a competent and reliable manager. They had promoted other employees to positions of responsibility, creating a small but thriving family business. "Sometimes I can't believe how much our lives have changed," said Daniel one evening, watching Sarah Elizabeth teach Emma to identify different types of herbs in the garden. "It changed because we worked to change it," replied Sarah Elizabeth. and because we had the courage to believe we deserved good things. Robert, Daniel's brother, became a regular visitor and a loving uncle to Emma. He never explicitly admitted he had been wrong about the marriage, but his actions spoke louder than words. "Emma is going to be a businesswoman," he said one day, watching the 2-year-old girl arrange her dolls with the same meticulousness he saw in Sarah Elizabeth. "She has her mother's eye for detail, and her father's determination," added Sarah Elizabeth, smiling at Daniel. As Emma grew, it became clear she had inherited the best from both parents. She was smart like her mother, determined like her father, and had a natural charisma that charmed everyone she met. "She'll never have to feel inferior to anyone," said Sarah Elizabeth, watching Emma play confidently with other children from the area during a church gathering. "Because she's growing up knowing she's loved unconditionally," Daniel agreed. In their 6th year of marriage, they expanded to include pig farming, as they had planned. The addition was successful, significantly increasing their income and solidifying their reputation as diversified and competent producers. Sarah Elizabeth took responsibility for developing new herbal-based products, creating specialized lines for different health needs. Her products gained recognition even in the state capital, with doctors regularly recommending them. Daniel became a respected voice in the producers' cooperative, often consulted about best practices and growth strategies. He developed a mentorship program for young people interested in agriculture, sharing knowledge he had acquired through practical experience. "You've become leaders in the community," observed the town priest during a visit. "Your story inspires others to believe in themselves." "We hope so," replied Sarah Elizabeth. "Everyone deserves the chance to discover their potential." In the 7th year, they faced a crisis when a disease struck part of their chicken flock. It was the kind of challenge that could have ruined the business early on, but now they had resources and experience to handle the situation. Sarah Elizabeth worked day and night to develop natural treatments that complemented veterinary care. Her dedication saved most of the flock and impressed even the regional veterinarian. "I've never seen anyone with such strong intuition for animal care," said the veterinarian. "You should consider studying veterinary medicine formally." The suggestion planted a seed in Sarah Elizabeth. She began considering the possibility of expanding her knowledge through formal education, something she had never imagined possible for someone with her background. "What do you think about me studying veterinary medicine?" she asked Daniel that evening. "I think it would be brilliant," he replied without hesitation. "You have natural talent, and formal education would only make you more competent." They researched available options and discovered there was a correspondence study program that could work for someone in their situation. Sarah Elizabeth enrolled and began studying during afternoons when Emma was napping. The studies were challenging but rewarding. Sarah Elizabeth discovered she had an aptitude for formal learning, and her practical knowledge helped her understand concepts that other students found difficult. "Mommy is studying," Emma proudly declared to anyone who would listen, at 3 years old. "She's going to take care of all the animals." Emma's pride in her mother warmed Daniel's heart. It was exactly the kind of role model he wanted their daughter to have, a woman who never stopped growing and learning. When Emma turned 4, Sarah Elizabeth completed her correspondence studies and passed the exams to become a licensed veterinary assistant. The achievement was celebrated by the entire community. "From an uneducated farmhand to business owner and licensed veterinarian," said Mrs. Margaret during the celebration party. "Your story shows it's never too late to achieve dreams." "It shows that with proper support anyone can flourish," Sarah Elizabeth gently corrected. "I was just fortunate to find people who believed in me." The 10th year of marriage brought natural reflection on everything they had accomplished. Their property had become one of the most prosperous in the region. They employed 12 full-time workers and had customers in 3 states. Emma, at 5 years old, was a confident and intelligent child who could speak fluently about different aspects of agriculture and veterinary medicine. She had inherited her mother's short stature, but that never seemed to limit her in any way. "She doesn't even realize she's different," observed Daniel, watching Emma lead a group of taller children in a game during a party. "Because to her, different doesn't mean inferior," replied Sarah Elizabeth. "It's just different." They decided to have another child, and Sarah Elizabeth became pregnant easily. This second pregnancy was even more peaceful than the first, perhaps because they didn't have the anxieties of first-time parents. The second child, a boy they named Ryan, was born with normal height, but inherited other characteristics from both parents. He had his mother's observant eyes and his father's quiet determination. "Now we have a complete family," said Sarah Elizabeth, holding Ryan while Emma helped care for her baby brother. "And a legacy to leave," added Daniel, looking at his children and thinking about the future. As the years passed, Daniel and Sarah Elizabeth became respected figures not only in their community, but in the region as a whole. Their success story against initial expectations inspired many other couples and individuals. Sarah Elizabeth began occasionally speaking to women's groups about rural entrepreneurship and overcoming obstacles. Daniel developed training programs for young farmers interested in sustainable practices. "You've changed how people think about possibilities," said Ryan, the cooperative representative, during a visit. "You've proven that success doesn't have a specific appearance." "Success looks like hard work, honesty, and respectful treatment of all people," replied Sarah Elizabeth. "Those things are available to anyone." When Emma turned 10 and Ryan 5, they were well-adjusted children who understood the value of work, but also knew they were unconditionally loved. Emma had begun showing interest in following in her mother's footsteps in veterinary medicine, while Ryan demonstrated a natural talent for business like his father. "Our family is proof that love and hard work can overcome any obstacle," said Daniel, during an interview for the regional newspaper that was doing a story on successful rural entrepreneurs. "And that all people have value and potential, regardless of how they look," added Sarah Elizabeth. The interview was published with a photo of the entire family in front of their thriving property. It was a powerful image of success, built through determination, love, and true partnership. 15 years after that nervous day when Sarah Elizabeth stepped off the wagon, Daniel often reflected on how his initial expectations had been not only wrong, but limited. He had looked for someone to help with heavy physical work. Instead, he found a partner who helped him build a business empire based on intelligence, innovation, and meticulous care. He had expected a practical and efficient companion. He found a woman who was all that and more, courageous, visionary, determined, and capable of turning challenges into opportunities. "Do you ever regret responding to my advertisement?" he asked Sarah Elizabeth one evening, as they watched their children play in the garden she had created over the years. "Never," she replied without hesitation. "That advertisement led me to the only life I ever wanted, one where I'm valued for who I am, where I can use my talents, and where I can give my children everything I never had." "And do you ever regret accepting me when I stepped off that wagon?" Daniel smiled, pulling her closer. "That was the best day of my life, even though I didn't know it at the time. You weren't what I was expecting, but you were exactly what I needed." They remained in comfortable silence, watching the sunset over the property they had built together. It was a moment of complete contentment, the result of years of work, love, and mutual growth. "You know what amazes me most about our story?" said Sarah Elizabeth after a while. "What?" "How two people who started with completely wrong expectations about each other managed to build something so beautiful." "Maybe it's because we learned to look beyond expectations," suggested Daniel, "to see possibilities instead of limitations. And because neither of us gave up when things seemed tough at the beginning." Daniel nodded, thinking about the obstacles they had overcome together: family disapproval, community prejudices, business challenges, anxieties about having children, and hundreds of small daily adjustments needed to build a shared life. "Our daughter will never have to doubt her worth," said Sarah Elizabeth, watching Emma teach Ryan to identify different plants. "She's growing up knowing she's capable of anything she decides to do." "And Ryan is growing up knowing he should judge people by character, not by appearance," added Daniel. It was a legacy both considered more valuable than any financial success they had achieved. That evening, after the children went to sleep, Daniel and Sarah Elizabeth sat in the kitchen with a cup of tea, as they had done almost every night for 15 years. "Where do we go from here?" asked Daniel. "Wherever we want," replied Sarah Elizabeth confidently. "We've proven we can do anything together." They began discussing future plans. perhaps expanding to other regions, maybe developing new products, maybe even writing a book about their experiences to help other couples in similar situations. "Whatever we decide to do," said Daniel, "I want it to be something that makes our children proud and inspires others." "Then let's keep doing what we've always done," smiled Sarah Elizabeth. "Work hard, be honest, and show that true love can overcome any obstacle." When they finally went to sleep that night, both felt the deep satisfaction of lives well lived. They had built not only a thriving business, but a strong family, a respectable reputation, and a positive example for their community. 15 years earlier, when Sarah Elizabeth stepped off that wagon and saw the shock on Daniel's face, she could never have imagined that moment of embarrassment would become the start of the greatest adventure of her life. And Daniel, who had been frozen in surprise that day, now knew that moment of hesitation had been the prelude to the smartest decision he had ever made in his entire life. Together, they had proven that true love isn't based on met expectations, but on real people choosing to grow, learn, and build something beautiful together, regardless of the obstacles they may face. End of story. Now tell me, what did you think of this story of Daniel and Sarah Elizabeth? Did they make the right decisions by betting on each other despite first impressions? Leave your opinion in the comments and say where you're watching from. If you have any similar experiences to share, we look forward to reading them. Thank you so much for your company. Don't forget to leave a like and, more importantly, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other exciting stories we have prepared for you.